What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. That's right. It is our live trade deadline reaction show. Taking a Cadillac is more than just taking a drive. Discover which Cadillac is right for you and elevate every journey. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And Joe, the action really picked up in the last 48 hours. David Stearns working almost down to the final buzzer. The Mets handle plenty of business on the final day of the trade deadline. We're going to recap every single move. We're going to talk about who will now be wearing the Mets uniform. We're going to talk about the prospects, and there was a lot of them, maybe a more quantity approach rather than quality approach now by the Mets. We'll talk about that as well. But, Joe, this is one of the busier, not just Mets, but definitely league-wide trade deadlines we've seen lately.
Connor, if you have notifications on for SNY's Andy Martino and some of the national insiders, your phone was buzzing like crazy for the last 2 hours leading up into the deadline. And look, this is a situation where the Mets were incredibly aggressive, more so than I think maybe even I thought they would be. There was a lot of question coming in, David Stearns, obviously coming from Milwaukee. And last year's trade deadline, the Mets weren't particularly aggressive. It was a lot of kind of low-level moves, improvements, but not big moves. This year, I think David Stearns proved that he is ready for New York. He is ready to be running a win-now team that is trying to win a world championship. And other than the fans here, obviously, that are watching this show and will be watching the Mets for the rest of the season, is there a happier person than Carlos Mendoza with the bullpen that David Stearns put together for him?
I mean, the amount of weapons and different types of arms that he can go to now, Joe, is going to be a lot of fun to watch. Much different when you think of the bullpen games we've seen this year, how quickly things change after just one deadline. Of course, this is a special edition of the Mets Pod, our live trade deadline recap show. To make sure you don't miss shows like this, subscribe to the Mets Pod, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Hopefully you're watching on YouTube right now or any digital platform on social, and get in on the action. Send us mailbag questions. Ask your questions in the comments below. We are going to do a ton of mailbag questions. And you know what, Joe? Let's start with one that came down the pipeline pretty early. This is from Captain Obvious at It's a No-Brainer. Will Connor take advantage of this beautiful opportunity to purchase a Tyler Rogers jersey so he can have a legitimate Mets jersey with his own name on it, Joe? Now, I'm not a fan of the custom, I wouldn't order myself a Mets jersey with my last name on it, but if available, I like very random jerseys. I would get a Submariner rental pitcher jersey with my last name on it. I think I have to do this, Joe. It's just a matter of actually which color I go with.
You literally don't have a choice because,
no choice.
Like you said, adults with the custom jersey.
That's a bit much.
Yeah, that's a bit much. If you're a little kid, that's perfectly fine. But as grown adults, you don't really want to do that. But I'll tell you, if the Mets ever get a DeMayo on their team, I will be getting the jersey. So I think it is your responsibility to get Rogers. And not only is it Rogers, he's coming with a super unique number. Like he wore 71 with the Giants. So I don't know if he's wearing 71 with the Mets yet, but it's probably going to be a unique number. And it's your actual last name for an actual Mets player. You simply got to do it.
I'd probably be the only person at Citi Field, besides family members of his, with the Tyler Rogers jersey, and I would have it no other way. All right, let's go player by player. But before we do that, Joe, what you kind of hinted at this, and it was a narrative that never really made a ton of sense. It was based on assumption, but a lot of people were like, this is, Stearns, it was a small market GM. This is a big market. Does he have what it takes to be aggressive? Is he going to hold on to as many prospects and not make the adequate moves? What is your overall reaction looking at the group the Mets acquired, and more importantly, just how they handled their business in this real crunch time 48, 72-hour window where the action was nonstop?
I think he threaded the needle incredibly well. The Mets got significant additions. We'll get into each one, but Tyler Rogers has been one of the best relievers in baseball this year. Ryan Helsley is an all-star caliber closer. Cedric Mullins could be an everyday center fielder for this team. And obviously, if you go back a few days, Gregory Soto, I think, is ultimately the best lefty reliever that was traded. And Stearns got all of those, while at the end of the day, not losing any of the real top prospects in the system. And the pitching depth that the Mets have developed down in the minor league level, 8 pitchers were traded during these trades from the Mets minor league system, and none were Jonah Tong or Nolan McLean or Brandon Sproat. And they didn't even touch some of that second tier, which are guys like Jonathan Santucci,
Right.
Jack Wenninger, even someone like Will Watson that's emerging this year. So the Mets did a good job, I think, of threading the needle of being aggressive, but also not, completely sacrificing the future of this team. So it's try to win now, but keep that winning going forward, which is the whole idea of continuous success that the Mets have preached since David Stearns took the job.
And I think, kind of piggybacking off of that, Joe, it's not just about keeping those young players, the stockpile for the future at the big leagues for your team, which some of them absolutely will be, especially the high-end pitchers like Jonah Tong. And some guys might play a part in the end of the season. Now we'll finish with that conversation, guys that can get called up. But the winter is long, Joe, and you see a lot of starting pitchers get moved during the winter when there's more time to do business and there could be extensions where you might need more of your premium prospects to go get those guys. A lot of the supply of starting pitchers was guys that you'd hope for a bounce back, or you were going to have to pay an insane price to get them because teams don't want to fully sell this time of year, whether it's a reflection towards their fan base or the team. You just don't see a lot of frontline starting pitchers moved. So yeah, let's jump right in move by move. Let's start with Cedric Mullins, because this is something we felt really strongly about for a long time. You've been on the idea of acquiring Cedric Mullins back in the spring. I remember basically before the season started, looking at a center field rental player, and the Mets get this one done. We'll talk about the Luis Robert side of things after this, but I want to focus on the specific deal. The Mets acquire Cedric Mullins. They send out 3 lower-level prospects, Raymond Gomez, who is a fireball thrower. He's probably the biggest name. Anthony Nunez, Chandler Marsh go in this deal. But focusing on Mullins right away here, Joe, obviously an upgrade offensively from Tyrone Taylor. Not a significantly massive upgrade, but a guy that hits some big home runs, can steal bases. But the range that he has in center field, and we saw a couple of spectacular catches this week alone, is as good as it gets really across baseball, honestly.
David Stearns mentioned this in his media availability after a deadline, talking about, he was asked about Mullins' defense, which, outs above average likes him, but defensive runs saved do not. And he attributed it to a hamstring injury that Mullins had earlier in the season. That kind of sapped some of his defensive value. But as you said, I think he's robbed 2 home runs and made a crazy diving catch in the last 5 days. This is a guy that truly can handle center field, gap to gap. He could play it at Citi Field, and he brings power to the table. He brings the ability to steal bases to the table. He may not be having the best year of his career here. And there are some reverse splits, which is not normal for him. So I wouldn't look ahead that he's not going to hit right-handed pitching, but he's going to hit left-handed pitching. But at the same time, the Mets had to come away with a center fielder. Jeff McNeil, I really appreciate his versatility and his ability to stand out there. He did better than I even thought he would have, but the range is not going to be there. The decisiveness that you need to be as a center fielder, I don't think McNeil has that yet. And Tyrone Taylor's a guy that his bat doesn't play every single day. So the Mets being able to pull off Cedric Mullins for 3 prospects that, talented guys, they're all reliever prospects, but they didn't lose anything that would rank inside of the top 20 of the system, maybe not even the top 25 for me. So it's really a low type of return for a guy that in Mullins that may not be having his best year, but he's been playing better of late, and we might see the best of Cedric Mullins here over the next 2-3 months heading into free agency.
A guy that typically thrives when the lights are pretty bright, Joe. And when GMs say things or president of baseball operations says something, you could be like, okay, maybe that's them being a little, bullish or glass half full. The Mullins injury note just simply makes a lot of sense when you just look at the player of what he's been more recently compared to what the player was. I mean, this is somebody in the month of July that has an 868 OPS. He has been excellent in the month of July after he had a really tough May and June. He had a scorching hot start to the season. He's really turned it on in July. And you're right, Joe, while he's typically been somebody throughout his career that has not had the reverse splits. He's hit right-handed pitching much better than left-handed pitching. This year, it's been the opposite. He has an 866 OPS against lefties, while a sub 700 OPS against righties. But he's hit 12 of his 15 home runs against righties. So there's still the power there against righties for Cedric Mullins. But at the end of the day, it's kind of easy to simplify this move, right? Number one, in my opinion, I know you have some more thoughts on the prospects sent out, but definitely the, not strong feelings on this return compared to some of the other trades. It didn't cost much. Number two, this is somebody that is a big plus defensively in between Juan Soto and Brandon Nimmo out there in the outfield. And it's not just the range he plays, but this guy scales the wall as good as anybody in baseball. And I know that's a really hard thing to sustain, is robbing home runs, but Cedric Mullins is as good as anybody at it in the entire league. But also the fact that, he is an offensive upgrade right now. Tyrone Taylor is better as an off-the-bench defensive replacement, not an everyday player. And you mentioned the McNeil effect as well. So this just felt like, Joe, a piece of business that had to get done. I know some people are a little disappointed they couldn't kind of close the deal for Luis Robert. The White Sox, honestly, it's not shocking if you followed them the last couple of years. They are out of touch with reality and how to operate a functioning baseball team at this time of year. And, it just, them holding on to him, are they going to pay him $20 million next year? Maybe they do, but it's just kind of shocking that they held out for their asking price. And good thing the Mets pivoted, because it would have been scary hours if they didn't get anything done. The Mets on the final day of the deadline said, we're not closing the deal on this one. Let's pivot to the Orioles and pay a lower price for Mullins.
One of my number one rules of the trade deadline that I think everyone should follow is we cannot get mad if the Mets didn't trade for somebody who didn't get traded. That's right. That's the rule. You can't be mad if the guy didn't go somewhere else.
People needed center fielders, Joe. The Phillies got Harrison Bader today.
It sounds as if, and SNY's Andy Martino, I believe, reported that the Mets got a feel either like late last night or early this morning that the White Sox might hang on to Robert. And frankly, that's probably the feel for everybody. The Phillies, as you mentioned, jumped out to get Harrison Bader. The Mets went and got Cedric Mullins. The Padres went and got Ramon Laureano to go along with Ryan O'Hearn for first base to help them there. So all these teams pivoted away from Robert. So the White Sox, for better or worse, hung on to him. I guess the thought process there is they're hopeful he has a huge second half and continues the trajectory that he's been on for the last few weeks. Pick up that $20 million option and revisit this in the offseason and go to teams. All right, Robert bounced back to the type of player that he's capable of. We know he's capable of. And, maybe this is a conversation that we'll be having during the winter meetings edition of the Mets pod. Do the Mets trade for Luis Robert? So that it'll be something to watch, but I want to preface it with everyone should abide by the rule. Can't get mad about not trading for someone that didn't get traded.
So let's move over to a trade that I don't want to say shocked the baseball world, but I mean, Mets and non-Mets people I follow, and it was in the middle of the broadcast when Gary Cohen was talking about the trade as well during the Mets game. The acquisition of Tyler Rogers. This is the perfect example to me, Joe, and the exact return for the right-handed reliever was all names we know very well. Jose Butto, obviously a major league reliever that can be stretched out as a starter. Blade Tidwell, who has started games for the Mets this year as a rookie. And Drew Gilbert, who was one of two pieces the Mets got back for Justin Verlander. We had said at the time Ryan Clifford actually felt like the prospect with a higher ceiling, but Gilbert was a former first-round pick that played a high level of college baseball, so people are very familiar with him. When this trade came across, Joe, the reaction was, oh my God, the rental reliever market is at a premium like we rarely see. And while, listen, this is a good package for the Giants. I'm not taking away from that at all. Butto, when he's on as a reliever, could be a multi-inning reliever that has value. He didn't have any options left for the Mets, but that's a good throw-in for them. Tidwell, a flyer arm that, when you stack up the Mets system, there's just a lot of pitchers ahead of him right now. Drew Gilbert, well, the Mets have needed a center fielder all year long, and they have not given the almost 25-year-old Drew Gilbert a look. Whether that's right or wrong, time will tell, but they didn't seem interested in doing that. Joe, this to me got an inflated perspective of the impact of the return because people know these names. Where you look at the last three names that were sent for Cedric Mullins, 1% at most of Met fans have ever seen those guys play down at a St. Lucie game. So when it comes down to it, this is a good return for the Giants, but I have no problem for the Mets not only getting one of the best relievers in baseball, but how many guys throw like Tyler Rogers, Joe, that you can get that causes this kind of matchup problem?
Literally zero. He is a one of one. You go back to like Chad Bradford, essentially.
Yeah.
You have to go back quite a while to get somebody like Tyler Rogers. For me, I think this is the one deal from a value perspective. I think the Mets did the worst of all the trades they made. I think exactly what you said was how I was going to start with. I think a lot of people were screaming because they've heard of Blade Tidwell and seen him pitch. They've heard of Drew Gilbert. They obviously have seen Jose Buttel make an impact at the major league level over the last year. So this one felt heavy for the rental of Tyler Rogers. And especially when you see what the Yankees gave up to get Camilo Doval right against the deadline, who has multiple years of control. So,
but it's been pretty wild this year at times.
He's been wild, and it's been up and down for Doval. But Rogers is a guy. Was it a little bit of an overpay? Perhaps. But as you said, Connor, this is genuinely one of the best relievers in baseball. He consistently leads baseball in appearances. So this is a guy that if he pitches today, you don't have to give him tomorrow off. He could pitch tomorrow too. And he doesn't walk anybody at all. He is the best walk rate of relievers in baseball. He induces endless weak contact. And this is all with a sinker that'll top at like 83 miles an hour. He's got that rising slider that's
like a wiffle ball pitcher.
It's literally a wiffle ball pitch. So Tyler Rogers is going to make a massive impact for this team. And as you see in the stats below, an ERA under 2, a whip under 0.9, 53 games appeared in already, and there's 2 months of the season left. Rogers is going to make a huge impact, and it's going to be something that Carlos Mendoza is going to be able to utilize as early as the 6th inning, as late as the 8th inning. Rogers is proven in all different forms of leverage. And while it is a heavy return, and I think San Francisco, you're probably going to see all 3 of those players play for the Giants during this season. So good for them getting a good return. But Rogers, I think, is a huge win now move for the Mets.
I'll say this right now, Joe. He's already my favorite candidate for, can we find a way to get this guy extended for one more year next year, keep him here? And I know that could sound hard, but when you look at the Mets, the way they've developed this organization from top to bottom, this is a place where people want to be. They were able to get Ryan Stanek and Jesse Winker to come back on one-year deals. They clearly wanted to be here. They've established it being a culture that people want to be a part of. I think Mets fans are going to love this guy. And you talk about just a absolute workhorse. 2021, 80 games. 2022 and 2023, 68 games, both of those years. 77 games last year. He's already thrown in 53 this year. I mean, he's got that rubber arm. It's a really funky delivery. And he's just a hell of a reliever out of the... I mean, all the Mets hitters were saying, like, this guy's got... And Francisco Lindor was like, he's gotten me out a lot. So it's nice to have him on our side. So Tyler Rogers is a really, really big acquisition. And the Mets didn't stop there. They went out and got the Cardinals closer in Ryan Helsley. Hell's Bells, legend here, Joe. We're going to have double entrances at Citi Field between Helsley's Hell's Bells entrance to Diaz with the trumpets. But this one was another splash move. Jesus Baez, Nate Dom, Frank Elisol, 3 prospects go back in this one. Obviously, Baez is a pretty big return for Helsley, who's a closer. So that's not a surprise here. When you acquire another team's closer that's had a long track record of success, you're going to pay a premium price. But, man, there's so many reasons I was excited about this move, Joe. The fact that now, if you're facing the heart of the order in the 8th and you want to go to Diaz and you have literally a second closer on the team for the 9th, I like that. You could use your relievers as weapons. That's the way the Mets have built this bullpen. And Helsley just felt like that last puzzle piece that makes the picture look excellent.
Connor, when we talked about the Rogers trade just a minute ago, and I said I didn't love the value for the Mets, I loved the value of the Helsley trade. Frankly, I think just like total value in the package, the Mets might have actually given up more in value for Tyler Rogers than I think they did for Helsley.
Felt that way.
And Helsley is a certified all-star caliber closer. It's a fastball that averages over 99 miles an hour, tops at 102. It's gotten hit a little harder than it usually has historically this year. So that's something you want to monitor what's going on with the fastball. But the slider is his swing and miss pitch. This year, it's just over 45%. Last year was 50% whiff rate. This is a bona fide, hey, Edwin Diaz needs a day off. There's no fear in putting Ryan Helsley in the ninth inning. And if Edwin Diaz and Helsley are both available, you may be playing a 7-inning game that day because you get through 7, Helsley, Diaz, close the door. As far as the return here, Jesus Baez was the highest ranked prospect that the Mets traded overall. He's a guy that was inside my top 10 and would have been in my top 10 update that I'm going to be doing here in a few days. Nate Dohm was a 3rd-round pick last year out of Mississippi State. Kind of a back-end starter type of profile. The fastball is up to 95. The slider didn't really take a huge step early on in pro ball, so he's got some work to do, but a back-end starter type profile. And Frank Elisol is a fun one. 19th round pick last year out of a small college. Fastball with up to 95, 96. Good induced vertical break. So a good flyer for the Cardinals. But Helsley, Diaz, I don't know if there's a better 8-9 in baseball now.
I mean, Stearns has completely rebuilt this bullpen this is something that can even be overlooked in these situations. Now you're bumping down the few high leverage arms you had. Reed Garrett, Ryan Stanek made the joke the other night he may pitch in the 4th inning. It might not be a joke.
Yeah, I don't think that's much of a joke. When a starter goes 3 2/3, just throw Ryan Stanek out there.
It's really remarkable, just the different arms they have, the caliber of arms they have. And I think, the last one being Gregory Soto, who we discussed on, our flagship show earlier in the week, but it's worth mentioning here because he fits in as that other lefty with Brooks Raley and a very different style of lefty who Mets fans have already gotten to see. But it's not always just acquiring all this high impact relief talent, but putting the different puzzle pieces together, Joe. And now they just have matchups for every kind of scenario, especially when you factor in lefty and Soto.
It's a very unique bullpen that David Stearns put together here at the deadline, and it is about being different. Tyler Rogers obviously has the lowest arm slot in all of baseball. Ryan Helsley, on the other hand, has one of the highest arm slots in all of baseball. He's an over-the-top guy. Brooks Raley, the main left-hander that's here, he's your prototypical, low 90s sinker, sweeper, changeup kind of guy. And Gregory Soto is your mid to upper 90s power fastball, power slider. So it's different looks for different situations, which make Carlos Mendoza have such an easier job as he's managing through these games. And if you look at what was all in all traded from the bullpen market, it was Gregory Soto and Danny Coulombe from the Twins. Those are basically the two lefties that went. And Coulombe is, I would say, very similar to Raley from a stuff standpoint. So I think the Mets got the absolute best fit for their roster in getting Soto. And now this bullpen, as you said, you're shifting everybody down, like Reed Garrett's down in the pecking order, Ryan Stanek. The Mets bullpen right now, if it's not the best in baseball, it is in the conversation with teams like the Padres, who obviously added Mason Miller to Robert Suarez, or the Yankees had a massive day in the bullpen, adding David Bednar and Camilo Doval and Jake Bird. But the Mets have a bullpen that can compete with anybody right now.
It really can. And it kind of, to put a bow on this before we get to mailbag questions, we got to hear from Stearns after. Understandably, the guy's looking tired, man. It's been a tough 48 hours. He's been up making calls, closing deals, but he credited the scouting staff and the player development staff for building up an asset pool that they can go have a deadline like this. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, think about when we were doing this show a couple of years ago, Joe, the problem with the deadline, and the credit to the Yankees that did make some moves at the end of the day, but it was a problem for them for a long time. When you don't want to tap into your top 5 prospects, as we saw some teams do today, right? We saw the Padres get pretty crazy. And we'll talk about all the matchups on our normal show throughout, the next week and beyond. I kind of want to keep this Mets focused. But you have to go into that pool when you don't have depth. The other route you can go is you can go quantity and give your 12th prospect and your 23rd prospect and an unranked prospect for a pretty high caliber player. And the Mets, in such a short time, perfect example. You're talking about a 19th round pick that they turned into an asset that can help them acquire a high caliber major league player. That you want to keep churning those over time and time again. So then we get to see Carson Bench and Jonah Tong and Jet Williams and soon Nolan McLean at Citi Field. And we will. That's the beauty of it. You can be highly competitive and impactful and active at the deadline, but you get to hold on to your premium talent that is going to be cost effective for your major league team. That was something Stearns pointed to in his presser, Joe, and it's something I kept thinking about at the entire deadline. We'll get into the starting pitching conversation in a moment because I get there's frustration from that, but you can't create a supply all the time that just doesn't exist. And I was very happy with this deadline. Obviously, I'm not calling the Mets a perfect team. There typically aren't perfect teams in baseball, but they are a much better team today. And I think people should be generally happy, not only about the moves that they made, but sometimes, Joe, about the moves that you don't make.
It was an excellent deadline for the Mets, in my opinion. Not perfect. We'll talk about the starter, as you said, something I was hoping they would address. But they got center field. They got 3 impactful relievers to add with one of, if not the best closer in baseball with Edwin Diaz. But it is a credit. David Stearns, I'm glad he brought it up because they don't get enough pub, I think. And we try to do it on our show as much as possible. But the amateur scouting department, whether that's internationally or domestic, that's the player development group headed by Andy Green with the top of hitting with Jeff Albert and pitching with Eric Jagers. If those guys aren't doing their jobs, the Mets cannot have a deadline like this. Depth of the farm system is the most important thing you can do, not just for helping your major league team by a guy like Jose Butto, who ultimately became a trade candidate over time, but was a real factor for the Mets. And this wasn't a huge international signing. This was a guy that ended up, I think the best he ever was ranked for me was like 16th in the system, something like that. Having the depth of a farm system allows you to not only build up your major league team, but it allows you to be able to make these trades. And all right, we're not touching Jonah Tong right now. We're not touching Carson Bench or Brandon Sproat or these other high-level guys, but we have these other guys that are really interesting. They're just a tick below. And sometimes these teams at the deadline, it's not always the, hey, we are trying to trade for Pete Crow Armstrong because he's a highly regarded guy. It is, you have a lot of talented players and we want quantity. And it's, all right, this guy has good stuff. This guy has good pitch metrics. This guy really hits the ball hard or has good plate discipline. Whatever an organization is looking for, the Mets are becoming a situation and an organization where they're able to provide essentially whatever a team desires. The Mets have, I think, something that could fit for it.
I think so too. And I think that, it's going to be a wild, wild race now because so many teams in the National League got better. But outside of the Padres, it's not like anybody absolutely floored it. When you look at, the Phillies made some moves and Duran is a big time relief help for them. But, the depth of the bullpen is something that's going to be kind of interesting with them still. They didn't go out the volume route that the Mets and the Yankees and the Padres and all these teams did. And the Cubs didn't do a lot, which was a little bit surprising.
Very surprising.
Really. So, you're Kyle Tucker probably going to test free agency, so you would think this would be a year where you're trying to kind of ride the magic. But we're going to have a lot of mailbag questions in just a moment that are going to address all of this. But before we do, you're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod so you never miss a show. Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SMY's YouTube channel where you can get involved in the comment section and leave us a question or wherever you get your shows. All right, let's get to the mailbag here, Joe, and that kind of transitions and continues the topic we were just on. This is from Jake Spriggs on Facebook. Do the Mets have the best bullpen in the division now after trading for Rogers and Helsley?
No question about it. Honestly, I think they had the best bullpen in the division before any trades happened. The Phillies bullpen.
Well, every fan base hates their bullpen. Let's just get that out of the way.
That's relievers. Everybody hates relievers. They're the punching bag. It's the nature of the beast. But the Phillies bullpen has been a problem for them all year. Like when the Mets were playing that bad baseball where they were, 10-20 over the 30-game stretch, the Mets stayed in the race because the Phillies weren't playing too well and blowing games themselves. And then you look just through, Washington and Atlanta and Miami. I think the Mets had the best bullpen in the division before. And even with the Phillies maybe adding the best reliever of the relievers added in division, the Mets adding Helsley and Rogers and Soto, I think keeps them as the best bullpen in the division.
Yeah, Duran's a massive move for them. There's no denying that. You need somebody that can shut the door, but Jordan Romano's been a disaster for them. Some of the other relievers have had really big problems. Is Alvarado still suspended?
Yeah,
Joe?
he's still. I don't know how many games are left, but what's big with Alvarado is he is going to come back for the regular season, but he's ineligible for the postseason because he was suspended. So it doesn't really matter when you talk about that, maybe future NLDS or NLCS or whatever against the Phillies. Alvarado cannot be a part of it.
Which is massive because he's basically their second best reliever after Duran, or at least in the conversation as their second best reliever after Duran. All right, the next one from Jurgens Bauer, at Bauer_Jurgens on Twitter. Who will replace Buto's important role as long relief? Internal, Holmes, a young farmhand? Well, Stearns did say something they're not contemplating right now is Holmes going to the bullpen. Now, of course, that could change in a matter of time, but I think they have such a large amount of high-quality arms, Joe. Do you think they're going to be looking at somebody to handle that specific role, or do they just have more confidence that they can kind of send out waves of pitchers and use them differently? I don't know if this is a role that just has to be fulfilled, because as we've seen, unfortunately, with Buto, there's times where it was completely ineffective, even if he got you through an inning and a half.
And the thing is, Buto wasn't really that traditional long reliever. He was just a multi-inning option. And right now, I think Rico Garcia is still around. He could probably pitch 2 innings for you. The name I would keep an eye on as someone to maybe soon fill that role is Paul Blackburn, who has one more rehab outing left, and then he's going to be in a conversation, as David Stearns said, to what his role is going to be. I could see him being that long reliever, at least for a period of time. As far as Clay Holmes goes, I know because everyone texts me about it. Everyone makes sure to let me know in my mentions that Clay Holmes needs to not be a starter anymore and needs to move to the bullpen. The Mets are not measuring what's going on with Clay Holmes on blanket amount of innings. It is all sports science and seeing how he's recovering in between starts. How does his stuff look? In my opinion, it seems like the stuff is a tick down.
Not striking out a lot of people anymore.
He's not striking guys out. So the stuff seems to be a tick down. And I do believe, whether they want to say it or not, he will inevitably find his way into the bullpen. I just don't think that time is right now. As far as the young kids go, I'm looking at them as rotation options. Yeah. Nolan, McLean, Brandon Sproat, because the Mets didn't address the starting rotation. And you and I talked about it on the regular episodes of the Mets pod that we wanted to see a starter, even if it was a back end guy that was maybe just a little more stable than Clay Holmes or a little more stable than Frankie Montas. The Mets didn't do that. And to me, that is an internal organizational vote of confidence in what they think Nolan McLean and Brandon Sproat could be as the rest of the season moves on and they continue their development. I'm expecting you're going to see, Andy Martino, who I mentioned earlier as well, mentioned Nolan McLean as an option that could be here maybe sometime soon. And I'm going to keep pumping Brandon Sproat's name as well. The Mets, I think, are going to be getting some impact in a starting role from one of those young pitchers at the AAA level.
Well, we have a question on YouTube from Christopher Oreo, addressing that. Do you think Sproat is a better call-up due to the adversity he has overcome in AAA, or McLean with that wipeout sweeper? Before I toss this question to you, Joe, to me, I kind of want to see both of them because I'm chasing ceiling right now for the playoffs. Obviously, David Peterson, Sean Manaea, let's hope Kodai Senga gets right. You could count on them to start a playoff game. That's not what anyone's talking about. It's that fourth guy that you mentioned. Love the way Holmes started the season. It's been rough for a while now, and maybe he just has hit a wall in a really tough transition that, looked like the right idea. It's just these things hit speed bumps. Frankie Montas, I don't think a lot of people have a ton of trust in him starting a playoff game right now. I want to see if one of these guys catches a little lightning in the bottle at the end of the year and can have some adrenaline for a playoff game as a fourth starter. But I don't know which one based on results over a long time, McLean. But you bring up the intrigue in Sproat, Joe.
I would say I think McLean is more ready to go
It's
than
the first
Brandon
crack.
Sproat is. Yeah, I would give McLean the first shot. I think that wipeout sweeper, as Christopher mentioned, is one of the best pitches in all of minor league baseball. He's got a pretty good fastball. He's got a curveball, changeup. I think, and he throws more strikes, I think, than Sproat does in general. So I would give McLean the first shot, but I'm 100% with you, Connor. I want to see both of these guys before the year is out and see how the chips fall, because the rotation and bullpen that we're looking at right now, today, right after deadline, is not going to be the rotation and bullpen that we're looking at on September 15th, one way or another. So I want to see both these guys, because I think one of them certainly has the potential and the ceiling to be that fourth game of a playoff series starter that you're looking for.
Yeah, and listen, the Mets have a nice little runway here to figure that out with them. And something you said at the top goes to show you they have some confidence that one of them is going to help this team this year, rather than paying the insane price that, a lot of guys just weren't moved as starting pitchers at the deadline. All these teams wanted starting pitching to help for the playoffs, but you kind of got to go where the market is. The next one from Hannibal on YouTube. Do you think we might sign Rogers back if he pitches well? This is something I was advocating for at the top, Joe. Always hard to get a read on these things where you're talking about a guy in Rogers that is originally born in Colorado. He's been with the San Francisco organization since 2019. You never know how, established and settled in a guy is somewhere. You could always just go back. The Giants spend or try to spend money every single offseason. But if he has success here and likes it here, I would love to be aggressive to keep him in this bullpen, at least for next year.
While I wanted the Mets to get one of these cost-controlled, under-control relievers, Griffin Jax was my guy, and Joan Duran, obviously a fantastic reliever that I would have loved to see in a Mets uniform as well. I don't have fear of the Mets going for rentals in this time and in this era. They built a culture here that players want to stay. The Mets traded for Ryan Stanek. We love Ryan Stanek. I wouldn't classify him as a New York guy, but he came here, loved it. They treated his family well, and Ryan Stanek re-signed with the Mets in this past offseason. So I think whether it's Rogers, Helsley might be seeking a closing job.
That was why I didn't count him.
Might be a little more difficult, but there's also the uncertainty with the Edwin Diaz situation. Ultimately, I think the Mets are able financially and from a culture perspective to convince these guys to stay. So if Tyler Rogers comes here and pitches the way that he did for San Francisco, if I'm David Stearns, that's going to be one of my top priorities heading to the offseason, is keep this guy around.
Yeah, as a Mets fan, at some point, you need to applaud the organization and this regime. When is there a guy that they want to retain that they can't retain? Shomania was only here for a year. They were able to bring him back. Luis Severino is on the A's talking about how much he wishes he wasn't. He wanted to come back to the Mets. I mean, time and time again, we're seeing that kind of change. They got Juan Soto to come here. I'd call that pretty important. So my prediction now is one of Rogers or Helsley will be in this bullpen beyond this year. I agree with you, Joe. It is always tougher to retain a closer and not have the closing job for him open. And that's a long offseason conversation for the Mets pod, which spends lots of hours talking about the Mets during the offseason if you haven't listened to our show. Now or Never Cards on YouTube. Connor and Joe, do you think the Mets will be okay in the playoffs without any starting pitching trades? I'm not going to sit here, Joe, and say that everything's going to be perfect and fine. But what I can tell you is the Mets starters last year were pretty dang good and pretty close to getting this team to the World Series. And who's starting playoff games for the Mets going into the playoffs this year, assuming health? David Peterson, Kodai Senga, Sean Manaea, with a way better bullpen. The thing that we're just going to keep harping on with this show is, who is the fourth guy? And can one of McLean, if one of McLean or Sproat catches some lightning, nobody is going to care about them not trading for a starter at the deadline. But obviously, there's a dice roll aspect to that.
My question here is, which starter that got traded did you really want?
At cost.
Yeah.
You can't just say, I wanted Merrill Kelly.
Yeah.
And
Merrill Kelly came in, I would say, kind of reasonable. It wasn't terrible. I believe the Rangers gave like their 9th ranked prospect and their 14th ranked, and then someone a little lower. So it wasn't bad. That would be the one name that I would say that one made sense. Kind of funny, on Baseball Night in New York on SNY, Adam Ottavino said, "Oh, I know Merrill Kelly, and he absolutely hates New York City." So maybe that wouldn't have been the perfect fit. But did you want Adrian Hauser back? Like, the options just weren't there. There was a lot of names bandied about, whether that's Sandy Alcantara, whether that's Edward Cabrera, whether that's Zach Gallen, whether that's Dylan Cease, and none of those guys moved. So the Mets didn't get a starter, which I felt they needed. I believe you felt they needed. But when you look at what was moved, all right, Merrill Kelly would be, I guess, a better 4th game playoff starter. But at the same time, is Merrill Kelly standing, like, are the Mets winning a World Series because they had Merrill Kelly, or not winning a World Series because they didn't get Merrill Kelly? I don't think that's the case. So I don't know how much of a missed opportunity it was, because I don't see where that opportunity necessarily was in the market. But I do not feel fantastic about the rotation. Like, I think the top 3 are good, and I'm unsure about what is after that. And that's something I think that's going to have to figure itself out over the next 2 months. And we have some hope that these young guys with some real good stuff could step up.
Here's the reality. We're not having this conversation just hitting it on the head over and over and over again with a hammer. If Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso have the type of July that they typically would have, that's why this conversation has turned to, we need elite pitching right now. Because if Francisco Lindor plays like Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso plays like Pete Alonso and Juan Soto has a month even close to what he had in June, then you're going to win games with David Peterson and Sean Manaea and Kodai Senga and arguably the best bullpen, at least in the NL East right now. Yeah. And if those guys perform like they did in July, when the lights get bright at the end of the year, that's not David Stearns' fault, okay? So I get it. It might sound like I'm kind of like caping here a little bit for not getting a starting pitcher, but teams called about Sandy Alcantara. The Yankees were one of them. The Mets are one of them. Teams really wanted him, and he's having a horrible year, right? Zach Gallen is having a horrible year. It sounded like the Red Sox wanted Dylan Cease, weren't able to close the deal. I mean, at some point, your superstars got to play like superstars. You rounded out the true weak areas on this team, and you got to go to battle. So, I mean, that's what it comes down to, Joe. And I'm a believer that the superstars on the Mets are going to play more like they did earlier in the year than what they did in July.
That changes the whole equation. And then you have Brandon Nimmo, who's been relatively consistent, other than kind of like a really tough beginning of the year. He's been consistent. Jeff McNeil could hit. Cedric Mullins is going to add something here. And then you're going to have the young flashes of Francisco Alvarez, of Ronnie Mauricio, of Brett Beatty, of Mark Vientos. The offense, I think, is going to be fine. The bullpen, I think, is going to be awesome. The rotation just needs to not completely ruin things. And I think the top 3 raise the floor enough that that's ultimately not going to happen.
Speaking of floors, Steve Miller, Steve.Miller on Twitter, who has the highest floor of the Mets prospects that were traded away?
Highest floor, I will say probably Blade Tidwell, I think.
Reliever
Tidwell,
floor?
Yeah. I think Tidwell, right now it's looking probably unlikely he's going to make it as a starter. I think he just hasn't established what that third pitch really is going to be that really separates being a reliever and being a starter. I think the Giants would be well served to take Tidwell, throw him in the bullpen now, let him pump, mid to upper 90s, that sweeper, and maybe work on just one more pitch to offset it. I think Tidwell has a pretty good floor. And Drew Gilbert, especially with the trade of Yastrzemski, like after the deadline, this kind of came out, the Giants trade Yastrzemski to Kansas City, I believe. I think Drew Gilbert could get an opportunity there almost right away.
Is he going to make his debut at Citi Field this weekend?
That would be electric. And maybe, actually, the answer actually might be maybe. And he's going to be a real platoon guy, I think, right now, to use my very famous term. He has never hit lefties, really, in his whole minor league career. It's always been a struggle, but he hits right-handed pitchers, really pull-centric player. But overall, highest floor, I'll go Tidwell, because I think he has staying power as a reliever.
And so many of the other players they traded, Joe, they're at the A-ball level. They're below the AAA level, where it's hard to call a floor with that level of talent for those kinds of guys. So, I mean, listen, this was a really fun trade deadline. The Mets made a ton of moves. I'm going to be at Citi Field this weekend. I can't wait to see how electric it is. I'm going to be keeping an eye on the bullpen to see who's throwing every single time, like what fireball thrower is in there next. But give me some we don't get to do closing thoughts a lot because we're jammed with so much stuff going on during our regular show, whether it's the scoreboard, whether it is our mailbag. Give me some closing thoughts on our trade deadline special.
I know a lot of Mets fans have responded to me and been on Twitter and all social media saying they didn't get a starter, they needed another bat, they needed this. You guys should be very happy with what the Mets did. This is the most aggressive deadline that the Mets have had since 2015. And
that was good.
And that worked out pretty well. They didn't finish the job, but they made it to the World Series. David Stearns, I think, proved to me and should have proved to everyone listening to the show right now that he's fit for this big market New York try to win a World Series job. And you have an owner committed to obviously the finances that are required to bring in any trade deadline acquisitions. The Mets have a fantastic bullpen that I think will make up some of the ground. And David Stearns said it as well, that there's different ways to build a pitching staff in 2025. It is not, you need 5 starters that go 6 to 7 innings and then a couple good relievers. World Series and championships and playoff success in the current day of baseball, they're not won by the starting pitchers. They're won by the relief pitchers.
Well, the Dodgers last year.
Yeah.
Barely had a rotation.
They had 2 bullpen games in a World Series that they won. So the Mets right now, they have a bullpen that'll step up with anybody. And then when we get into October, that is when you're going to see Francisco Lindor come alive. And that is when Pete Alonso comes alive. And Juan Soto is one of the best postseason hitters in baseball. So Mets fans should be very excited. I think they did some really good things. It wasn't a perfect deadline. They could have done maybe a touch more, but I come away really happy. And as you said, I won't be at Citi Field this weekend, but I cannot wait to be watching the Mets on TV this weekend.
The process of the organization right now is as good as I can ever remember, honestly, as long as I've been a fan of this team, where you look at, you get somewhere and you preach that you're going to have the flexibility to go after big stars when a rare opportunity presents itself. That was Juan Soto this offseason, a guy in his mid-20s that is a Hall of Fame caliber player, like in trajectory-wise. So you're able to do that. You build up a farm system that gives you not only the quality at the top that we're constantly excited about, young players making their debut at Citi Field. We're going to see Nolan McLean this year. You know, there's going to be a time not that far away now where Jet Williams and Carson Bench are going to be out there for the Mets, who have just been phenomenal in Double-A right now. Jonah Tong is one of these stories across pitching in the entire MLB pipeline system right now. So you have that going. And then the depth of the system that allows you to make trades to improve the big league club. It just feels like, Joe, for the first time in a long time, it's not 2 out of a couple things firing on all cylinders. Everything is working cohesively together, where we're going to have a pipeline of young talent that's going to help the major league team. The excess of talent is going to be used to help the major league team in the trade market. And then we have the payroll capabilities from ownership to go out and make smart free agent signings as well. So I'm really excited. I can't wait to see what this team does the rest of the year. Go win the division and make some noise in the playoffs. And I mean, they're going for a World Series. That's what these moves. You don't make these moves just to kind of get the fan base back in. And can you make the playoffs and steal a series, which kind of felt like last year where the Mets overachieved. Now the expectations raise up a little bit, and I think there's something really exciting to that. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Taking a Cadillac is more than just taking a drive. Discover which Cadillac is right for you and elevate every journey. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer. Remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SMY's YouTube channel. You can leave us a review with a question. We always look for those 5-star reviews for our mailbag segment. Of course, if you watch on YouTube, you could also leave those questions in the comments as well. Become a subscriber over there. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next week.